The land had always been quiet. It sat at the edge of a growing neighborhood where paved roads slowly turned into gravel and then into dirt. Tall grass moved with the wind, and an old fence marked the boundary. The owner grew up visiting this place as a child, helping clear brush and learning where the soil stayed soft after rain. As an adult, he did not live on the land full time, but he never forgot it. He paid the taxes every year, kept the paperwork in order, and visited whenever work allowed. To him, the land was not an investment. It was family history. In the months before he left for deployment, life felt rushed. Orders came earlier than expected, and suddenly every day had a list. There were medical checks, training sessions, and long meetings that ran late into the night. At home, he packed slowly, careful with small things. He labeled boxes, locked cabinets, and placed important documents in a folder he trusted. He double-checked his bills and set automatic payments. He even emailed the Homeowners Association to confirm that his records were clear. A short reply came back saying everything looked fine. The neighborhood had changed since the association took over. Rules grew longer. Notices became sharper. What once felt like a loose group of neighbors now felt like a small office with power. The owner kept his distance. He followed the rules, avoided arguments, and stayed polite. He believed that if he did his part, there would be no trouble. Before leaving, he walked the land one last time. He fixed a loose fence post and picked up trash left near the road. He took photos, more out of habit than worry. On the day he left, the sky was clear. His bag was heavier than it looked, and the goodbye felt shorter than it should have been. He told himself the deployment would pass quickly. He trusted that things at home would stay still while he was gone. The land had waited through storms and years of silence before. It could wait again. What he did not know was that within weeks of his departure, a letter arrived at his empty mailbox. It was thin and easy to miss, folded between flyers and ads. The letter claimed there were unpaid violations. It listed problems that did not exist: overgrown grass, unsafe fencing, failure to respond. The return address belonged to the association, because no one was home. The letter sat there until the wind scattered the rest of the mail. Soon after, another notice was sent. This one stated that the property was considered neglected. It warned of fines and future action. The association posted a copy on a public board near the entrance of the neighborhood. Few people noticed. Fewer still understood what it meant. Some assumed the owner had moved away for good. The association board met quietly. In a small room with clean walls and a long table, they reviewed the file. They spoke about rules and timelines. They talked about how the land could be better used. One member mentioned how close the property was to new development. Another said it was a waste to leave it empty. They voted to move forward with enforcement steps, claiming they had made enough attempts to contact the owner. Far away, the owner lived by a different clock. Days blended together. Communication was limited, sometimes impossible. When messages did arrive, they were short and delayed. He asked about home now and then, and was told things were quiet. No one mentioned the land. No one mentioned letters. Back home, the association added fines to the account. The amounts grew with each notice. They filed documents that described the land as abandoned. They used language that sounded official and final. A timeline was created, dates marked, boxes checked. To anyone reading quickly, it looked proper. To anyone looking closely, it was rushed. A small sign appeared near the road one morning. It stated that the property was under review. A neighbor slowed their car to read it. Another shook their head and drove on. People talked in low voices. Some felt uneasy. Others believed that the association knew what it was doing. The owner's folder of documents sat untouched in a locked drawer miles away. His emails went unanswered because they were never sent. He had no reason to check records or call the association. He believed, as many would, that silence meant peace. As weeks turned into months, the association took the final step. They approved a forced sale, claiming it was the only option left. The decision was framed as necessary and legal. A buyer was already interested. Papers were signed quickly. Fees were paid. The land changed hands on paper, long before anyone placed a foot on it. The first machine arrived early one morning. It parked near the fence, its engine loud against the quiet field. Workers placed markers in the soil. They measured and talked, pointing toward the road. The fence came down in sections. Dust rose into the air. A new sign was placed, clean and bright, announcing future plans. Some neighbors watched from their windows. One person took photos on their phone, unsure why, but feeling that they should. Another neighbor considered calling the owner, but did not have a current number. The day went on, and the field no longer looked the same. Still, the owner knew nothing. His days were filled with routines that left little room for thought. At night, he thought about home in general terms, not specific places. He imagined the land as it had always been, open, quiet, waiting. Toward the end of his deployment, a message finally made its way through. It was short and vague, sent by someone who did not want to get involved. It asked if he had sold his land. The owner read it twice, confused. He replied that he had not. No answer came back. A feeling settled in his chest. Not panic, not anger, but something colder. He searched his records when he could. Everything showed the land was his. Taxes paid. No missed bills. No warnings. He told himself there had to be a mistake. When he returned home weeks later, he drove past the familiar turn without thinking. Then he slowed. The fence was gone. The grass was cut low. Flags marked the ground. A large sign stood where the old fence post had been. It listed a company name and future plans. He parked on the side of the road and stepped out. The land did not feel like his anymore, yet it was. He stood there for a long time, listening to the wind move through what was left. In that moment, he did not know who had made the decision or how far it went. He only knew that something had been taken while he was away, and that silence had allowed it to happen. Part 1 ends with him standing alone at the edge of his land, realizing that the real battle had begun long before he came home. The morning after he returned home, he went back to the land. The reality of what had happened started to sink in with every step. The machines had disappeared, but the markers and signs remained. The ground was disturbed, soil pressed down and trimmed neatly around the markers. It no longer felt familiar. Each blade of grass, each small dip in the land, seemed like a stranger. He walked slowly, taking photographs with his phone. Not to prove ownership, not yet, but to remember what had been taken. The memories of growing up here, of helping clear the underbrush, the quiet summers and snow-covered winters flashed through his mind. The land was supposed to be untouched, a place where he could go and feel peace. Instead, it had been claimed by others while he was away. He tried to call the Homeowners Association first. The line rang. A polite voice answered. He explained who he was and asked about the notices he never received, the fines that had been applied, and the sale he had no knowledge of. The response was cold, mechanical, and rehearsed. The person on the other end read from a script, saying that all procedures had been followed and that the sale was final. No room for discussion. No acknowledgement of mistakes. He hung up, frustration knotting in his chest. The neighbors had been watching from a distance. Some approached cautiously, keeping their voices low. One older neighbor remembered his family and said, "I think this was handled wrong. They never should have done this without giving you proper notice." Another shook their head, unsure if speaking up would cause problems. The community had always been polite, but fear had grown alongside the rules. It seemed the association had created a culture where people spoke quietly and avoided confrontation. Determined, he started digging into public records. Each visit to the county office revealed more of the process. Forms had been filed, signatures were present, dates marked. Some papers were missing signatures. Some notices were sent to a vacant mailbox. Even looking at the records, it was hard to believe how quickly the association had moved. The actions seemed legal on paper, but the truth was different. The spirit of fairness had been ignored. He hired a local attorney to help navigate the complexity. The attorney was quiet, but observant. After reviewing the case, she explained that the sale might be overturned. She spoke of errors in notice, improper handling, and the fact that the owner's absence for military service could not be used against him. The law was slow, and battles like this took time. The attorney said the first step was gathering evidence, photos, documents, emails, and testimonies. Meanwhile, the developer who had bought the land moved cautiously. They did not want a public dispute and often answered questions vaguely. They claimed they believed the purchase was legitimate and that they had acted in good faith. Their presence created tension in the neighborhood. Machinery appeared occasionally, small signs of preparation but no full-scale construction. It was as if the land was paused between two worlds, one of ownership and one of claims. The owner spoke with neighbors one by one. Each person had a story about the changes they saw, about the notices, about small discussions with the association. Collectively, these details built a picture of what had happened while he was away. People admitted that they were afraid to speak before, but seeing him back gave them courage. Some neighbors shared copies of letters they had saved, or photos they had taken. Others had notes they made when machinery came through. Slowly, the pieces began to fit together. One afternoon, he visited the county recorder's office again. He stood among rows of files, reading page after page. Dates lined up, signatures appeared to be forged or missing, notices sent to addresses where he had not lived for years. The weight of it was almost physical. How could people act so quickly, so deliberately, when he was away serving his country? A quiet anger began to simmer beneath the surface. Not the kind that demanded revenge, but a fire that demanded truth. He thought back to the day he left. The clear sky, the soft wind, the quiet promise that his land would wait. That promise had been broken, and yet he realized he was not powerless. He could fight. He could gather evidence. He could ensure that the association would face the consequences of their actions. The thought gave him strength. Small victories began to appear. The attorney found one missing notice that had been required but never sent. A document from the association board minutes revealed that certain members had personal interests in the developer. A local reporter took interest in the story after a neighbor sent in photos, showing the land being measured and marked while the owner was deployed. The story began to spread quietly in local circles. More people came forward with information. Every evening he walked the land. He measured spaces with tape, photographed the ground, and kept notes. The land was no longer untouched, but it was still his. Memories of childhood summer days, winter sledding, quiet mornings with dew on the grass reminded him why he would fight. It was not about money or revenge. It was about respect, fairness, and restoring what had been taken. He also began writing letters. Letters to the association, to local government offices, to anyone who could influence the case. They were clear, polite, and firm. He attached evidence, photos, and a detailed timeline. Each letter was a small act of reclaiming control, a reminder that he was present now and would not be ignored. The neighbors started to notice his determination. Some left notes of encouragement. Some shared documents they had kept. They saw that he was not angry in a reckless way, but determined with a calm focus. Slowly, the neighborhood began to support him openly. The association had relied on silence and absence, but presence and persistence could be just as strong. Late one night, sitting at the kitchen table, he spread out documents, photographs, and notes. The house was quiet, the wind outside gentle. He realized how complicated the situation had become. It was more than a personal grievance. It was a legal struggle, a moral battle, and a test of community awareness. The documents were not just proof of ownership, they were proof that rules meant something, and that neglecting them could not be allowed. In this part of the story, the owner learned patience and strategy. He could not rush legal processes. He could not demand immediate justice. But he could act steadily, gather evidence, and make sure every step was recorded. The sense of control returned gradually, replacing confusion with purpose. He also recognized the human side of the story. The neighbors were not enemies. They were witnesses and allies. The association was not a monolith. Individual members had made choices that could be challenged. The The developer had acted in good faith, but the transaction itself was flawed. By focusing on people and actions rather than just anger, he maintained clarity. As Part 2 concludes, the stage is set for confrontation. Evidence is gathered, support is growing, and the path forward is clearer. The land is no longer untouched, but the fight for its rightful ownership has begun in earnest. The story is no longer just about absence or loss. It is about reclaiming what belongs to him, with law, evidence, and a steady, determined spirit leading the way. Weeks passed as he focused on gathering every possible detail about what had happened in his absence. The land was still marked with stakes and signs, and although the machinery had disappeared, the sense of intrusion lingered. Each time he walked the property, he felt a mixture of nostalgia and quiet frustration. Memories of the past clashed with the reality that the land had been claimed by others while he was away serving his country. But he refused to let despair take over. Instead, he used that frustration as fuel. His attorney had advised patience. Legal battles were slow, and rushing would only hurt his case. They began drafting a timeline of events, carefully matching every notice, letter, and board action with his own records. It was meticulous work. He spent hours comparing dates, photographs, and documents. Each inconsistency, each missing signature. And every improperly sent notice became a piece of evidence he could use to challenge the sale. Neighbors became valuable allies. One woman, who had lived across the street for decades, shared her own story. She had received a notice months before he returned, but had ignored it, thinking it was routine. Another neighbor had taken photographs of the machinery the day it first appeared on the land. Others had notes about conversations with the HOA, including offhand comments that revealed the board's intentions. Slowly, he realized that he was not alone in witnessing this injustice. The developer, meanwhile, seemed cautious. They had purchased the land without fully knowing the background. When contacted, their representative spoke carefully, claiming they believed the transaction was legitimate. There was no malice in their tone, only concern about the potential for legal complications. The landowner understood that the developer was not the enemy, but the transaction itself was flawed and needed to be corrected. As he worked, he reflected on his time away. Military service had taught him discipline, patience, and strategy. These lessons now applied to his fight. He could not charge forward recklessly. He had to plan every step, document every action, and anticipate possible counterarguments. Each phone call, each email, each letter became a strategic move in the larger plan to reclaim what was his. One evening, while reviewing records at the county office, he noticed an unusual detail. A signature on one of the HOA documents did not match the official records of the board member listed. It was subtle, almost easy to overlook, but it was enough to question the legitimacy of the action. He photocopied the documents, noting every detail. This small discovery felt like a turning point. It was proof that the association had acted without proper authorization. Encouraged by these findings, he scheduled a meeting with the local authorities responsible for property oversight. He presented the documents, photographs, and witness statements. The officials listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. Their response was cautious, but promising. They assured him that the matter would be investigated, and that any irregularities would be documented for potential legal action. It was not a victory, but it was progress. Back at the property, the land remained quiet. The stakes and signs marked the boundaries of a plan that had not yet come to fruition. He walked the perimeter, imagining what it had been like during his absence. Machines cutting through the soil, markers being placed, and plans being discussed behind closed doors. The thought of it made his jaw tighten, but he did not allow anger to control him. Instead, he focused on what he could do now. Late nights were spent drafting letters to the HOA, pointing out every discrepancy, requesting explanations, and demanding that the irregularities be corrected. Each letter was carefully worded, firm but respectful. He knew that aggression would only give them grounds to dismiss his claims. Instead, he relied on facts, records, and the support of neighbors who had witnessed the changes. The community began to notice his persistence. Some neighbors approached him, offering additional evidence they had kept for months. Others shared their own experiences with the HOA, noting patterns of behavior that were questionable. Their support gave him both practical help and emotional reinforcement. He realized that this was no longer just about his land. It was about standing up against an organization that had overstepped its authority. As the investigation continued, he learned more about the internal workings of the HOA. Board members had personal connections with developers, and decisions had been made without transparency. Documents showed that meetings had been scheduled at times when property owners were unlikely to attend, and notices had been sent to outdated addresses. It became clear that the sale had been orchestrated to move forward without proper oversight. Despite the growing complexity, he maintained focus. Every discovery, every document, every witness statement added weight to his case. He created detailed logs of phone calls, meetings, and observations. These records would later prove invaluable in court. The attention to detail required patience, but he was determined to ensure that nothing was overlooked. One afternoon, he received an unexpected visit from a local journalist. The reporter had heard rumors about the land, the sale, and the unusual circumstances surrounding it. They spoke at length, and he shared as much as he could without compromising the legal process. The journalist took notes and photographs, promising to follow the story carefully. This added a new dimension to the fight, as public awareness began to grow. At night, he often sat by the window, looking out at the land. Memories of childhood summers, quiet mornings, and the simple pleasure of being in that space filled his thoughts. He realized that the fight was about more than ownership. It was about preserving something meaningful, something that connected the past, present, and future. The emotional stakes were high. They fueled his determination. The attorney worked tirelessly alongside him, drafting motions and preparing for potential hearings. Each step was planned meticulously. The goal was not only to reclaim the land, but to ensure that the HOA could not repeat such actions against anyone else. They wanted a clear, legal precedent that would protect property owners from similar overreach. Neighbors continued to support him, attending meetings, offering statements, and providing additional evidence. The sense of community strengthened as people realized the importance of standing together against arbitrary power. It was a slow process, but the collective effort made a difference. The landowner felt a growing sense of hope, knowing he was not alone. As Part 3 concludes, the groundwork for legal action has been laid. Evidence is organized, allies are identified, and the story is beginning to reach a wider audience. The land remains marked and quiet, a symbol of what is at stake. The focus now shifts from discovery to confrontation. The fight for justice is no longer just about correcting a mistake, it is about holding those responsible accountable, restoring what was taken, and ensuring that the principles of fairness and respect prevail. The investigation into the sale of the land began to reveal the depth of the OAS actions. Officials carefully examined the documents, comparing dates and signatures with other records. Each discovery seemed to confirm what the owner had suspected. The HOA had acted deliberately, exploiting his absence during deployment. They had overlooked or ignored proper procedures. Moving forward, as if his service did not matter, his attorney explained the legal steps needed to challenge the sale. Each motion had to be precise, each piece of evidence clearly presented. The process was slow, meticulous, and sometimes frustrating. The owner spent long hours at the kitchen table, organizing documents, making copies, and preparing detailed notes. Every notice sent, every photograph taken, every neighbor's statement became a tool in the fight to reclaim what was rightfully his. Neighbors continued to come forward. One elderly man remembered hearing the association board discuss the land's potential, suggesting that they could benefit from the sale. Another neighbor had taken video, recordings of meetings where the board appeared to be more focused on financial gain than fairness. These testimonies painted a picture of an HOA acting in its own interest rather than serving the community. The developer who had purchased the land became nervous. They had acted in good faith, but now faced the reality that the transaction was being legally challenged. Meetings were held and the developer agreed to pause any construction. The land remained quiet, marked only by stakes and signs, as the legal process unfolded. It was clear that no changes would happen until the matter was resolved, and the landowner felt a sense of relief knowing the property would not be altered further in the meantime. The local media became involved. A reporter from a regional newspaper visited the site, taking photographs and interviewing the landowner and neighbors. The story was carefully written to focus on the injustice and the steps being taken to correct it. It gained attention online and in the community, bringing more witnesses forward. People who had been hesitant to speak began to share their experiences, helping to strengthen the case against the HOA. Court dates were scheduled. The owner and his attorney prepared to present the evidence, including photographs, letters, official records, and statements from neighbors. Each piece was cataloged, labeled, and cross-referenced. The preparation was exhausting, but it brought a sense of control. For the first time, he felt that the balance was shifting and that the voices of fairness could outweigh the silence of absence. In court, the HOA initially tried to dismiss the case, claiming that all proper procedures had been followed. They argued that the notices were sufficient and that the sale was legal. However, the detailed evidence, eyewitness accounts, and inconsistencies in their records made it difficult for their defense to hold. The judge listened carefully, asking questions and requesting clarifications on specific points. The atmosphere was tense, but focused. As the truth began to come to light, the attorney pointed out that the landowner's military deployment should have been taken into account. The law required proper notification, which had not been done. The HOA's failure to follow these rules became a central point in the argument. Additionally, evidence of personal connections between board members and the developer raised questions about conflicts of interest. The judge noted these concerns, indicating that they would be considered in the final decision. Throughout the proceedings, the landowner remained calm. He understood that anger would not help the case. Instead, he focused on clarity, facts, and consistency. Each day of court hearings added to the narrative of injustice and deliberate oversight by the HOA. Witnesses from the neighborhood were called to testify, describing what they had seen and heard. Their statements provided context and reinforced the timeline of events. During breaks, he walked the property, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. Memories of childhood summers, quiet mornings, and family visits reminded him why he fought so hard. The land was more than soil and grass. It was a connection to his past, a symbol of his roots, and a promise for the future. The emotional stakes were high, but they gave him determination rather than distraction. The community watched closely. Support for the landowner grew as people realized the extent of the HOA's actions. Neighbors attended court sessions, wrote letters, and shared their own experiences. The collective efforts strengthened the case, demonstrating that the landowner was not acting alone. The HOA's attempt to isolate and take advantage of his absence was failing. Legal experts who reviewed the case highlighted the irregularities in procedure. They noted that the HOA had bypassed critical steps, failed to provide proper notice, and acted without transparency. This analysis became part of the official record, reinforcing the argument that the sale was invalid. The pressure on the HOA increased as scrutiny from both the court and the community intensified as hearings continued. The developer agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. They provided records of the transaction, communication with the HOA, and assurances that they had no intention to dispute the rightful ownership of the land once the court reached a decision. Their cooperation removed potential complications and clarified the focus on the HOA's misconduct. The landowner also reached out to local organizations that support property rights and veterans. They offered advice, guidance, and public support. Their involvement brought additional attention and credibility, making it harder for the HOA to dismiss the case or continue with evasive tactics. The story began to resonate beyond the neighborhood, highlighting broader issues of fairness, accountability, and respect for those serving their country. One evening, after another long day of court and documentation, he walked the land under a fading sun. The stakes cast long shadows, and the signs swayed gently in the breeze. The stillness of the property contrasted sharply with the intensity of the legal battles. He felt a sense of calm, mixed with anticipation. The outcome was not yet certain, but progress had been made. Steps had been taken, evidence presented, and voices heard. The landowner also reflected on his own growth during this process. Military service had taught him discipline, patience, and strategy, all of which proved invaluable in confronting the HOA. He learned to navigate bureaucracy, gather allies, and focus on long-term objectives. The fight for the land became a test of perseverance and resilience, demonstrating that determination, combined with careful planning, could challenge even well-organized opposition. As Part 4 concludes, the case is moving through the court system. The community is actively supporting the landowner, and the HOA's actions are under intense scrutiny. Evidence of misconduct has been documented, and the legal process is beginning to favor those seeking justice. The land remains intact for now, a symbol of hope and a promise of rightful restoration. The next phase will determine whether the years of effort, patience, and strategy will finally result in the landowner reclaiming what was taken from him. The final court day arrived with a quiet tension in the air. The landowner felt a mixture of nerves and calm determination. Months of investigation, evidence gathering, neighbor statements, and legal preparation had led to this moment. He walked into the courtroom with his attorney, documents carefully organized, photographs and witness statements at hand, ready to present the culmination of their effort. The judge entered and called the case to order. The HOA board members were present, appearing composed but guarded. Their previous confidence seemed diminished, likely aware that the extensive documentation and testimonies had created a formidable challenge. The developer also attended, prepared to provide factual information about the purchase, but not to contest rightful ownership. The courtroom held a charged silence as proceedings began. His attorney presented the case methodically. She outlined the timeline of events, highlighting the period of his deployment, the improper notices, missing signatures, and clear conflicts of interest among HOA board members. Each piece of evidence was detailed carefully, every document referenced, every photo explained. The strategy was precise, focusing on facts and law rather than emotion. The clarity of presentation left little room for doubt. Witnesses from the neighborhood were called to testify. They described what they had seen: the early arrival of machinery, the placement of stakes, conversations with board members, and notices sent to outdated addresses. Their statements painted a picture of deliberate action taken without proper communication or consent. Each testimony reinforced the argument that the HOA had acted unethically and, in some ways, illegally. The HOA attempted to defend their actions. They claimed that all legal requirements had been met and that the sale was valid. However, inconsistencies in their records, combined with the thorough evidence presented, made their arguments weak. The judge asked pointed questions about missing signatures, improperly sent notices, and potential conflicts of interest. The board struggled to provide satisfactory answers. The courtroom atmosphere shifted as the truth of their actions became increasingly clear. The developer's representative provided a straightforward account of the purchase, confirming that they had acted in good faith but had no intention of disputing ownership once legal clarity was achieved. Their cooperation reinforced the landowner's position, making it clear that the primary concern was the HOA's misconduct rather than the buyer's intentions. This eliminated a layer of complexity and focused the proceedings on restoring rightful ownership. As the hearing continued, the attorney emphasized the landowner's military service. She explained that his deployment should have been considered when enforcing notices and pursuing the sale. The law required fair and proper communication, which had not occurred. The judge noted the seriousness of this oversight, acknowledging the added weight of the landowner's absence due to service. This argument resonated strongly, highlighting both legal and moral considerations. During the breaks, neighbors and supporters from the community gathered outside the courthouse, expressed encouragement, shared stories, and provided additional documentation. The collective support demonstrated that the landowner was not isolated and that the HOA's attempt to exploit silence and absence had failed. The presence of the community added both emotional and practical weight to the case. The final arguments were presented calmly and confidently. The attorney summarized the evidence, recounted the injustices, and requested the court to void the sale, restore the property, and order the HOA to be accountable for their actions. She highlighted that this was not only about one property, but about protecting community rights and ensuring that no other property owners would face similar treatment. The plea was both legal and moral, appealing to justice and precedent. After careful consideration, the judge delivered the decision. The sale was declared invalid. The property was returned to the landowner, and the HOA was ordered to pay fines and cover legal fees. Several board members were removed from their positions due to conflicts of interest and misconduct. The court's ruling was clear and final. The HOA had overstepped its authority, and the landowner's rights had been violated. The courtroom seemed to exhale collectively, the tension finally lifting. The landowner felt a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and quiet triumph. He had reclaimed what was rightfully his, but the journey had been about more than property. It had been about standing up against misuse of power, ensuring fairness, and preserving the integrity of community governance. The months of patience, meticulous documentation, and careful strategy had paid off. The sense of justice restored brought a deep emotional closure. He returned to the land the following day. The stakes and signs had been removed and the soil showed no new construction. Standing there, he allowed himself to remember the quiet moments of childhood, the laughter, the simple pleasures of open spaces, and the connection to family history. The land was his once again. It would remain a place where memories could be made and preserved. Neighbors visited, offering congratulations and sharing in the relief of the outcome. Some expressed admiration for the calm determination he had shown throughout the ordeal. Others reflected on the importance of standing up for fairness. And the story spread through the community, serving as a reminder that vigilance and patience could overcome abuse of authority. The community itself seemed strengthened by the shared experience, more aware and protective of its collective rights. The HOA underwent major changes. New leadership was installed and strict rules were put in place to prevent similar incidents. Policies regarding communication, notice, and transparency were reviewed and reinforced. The association had learned that actions taken in secrecy or during the absence of community members would not go unchecked. The landowner's case became a reference for others who faced similar challenges, setting a precedent for accountability and fairness. Reflecting on the entire journey, the landowner realized that the process had taught him resilience, strategic thinking, and the value of community support. He understood the importance of careful record-keeping, documentation, and measured response in the face of injustice. His experience became a personal lesson and a story to inspire others. Facing seemingly insurmountable challenges, the property itself became a symbol. Not just a place of land, but a representation of justice, perseverance, and the triumph of patience and principle over improper authority.
Ow.
The restored land carried the weight of the battle, but also the promise of peace and continuity.
Outstanding.
Among the familiar trees and grass, he felt a renewed connection to the land and the generations who had come before him. The developer, having cooperated fully, maintained respect for the final outcome.
Out.
The resolution reinforced the importance of clarity, legality, and ethical conduct in property transactions, providing lessons for all parties involved. In the weeks that followed, the landowner focused on restoring the property to its former state. Fences were repaired, and small improvements were made, but the spirit of the land remained as it had always been. He walked the fields often, reflecting on the journey, appreciating the quiet victories, and maintaining a sense of vigilance to prevent any future misunderstandings. The land was more than soil. It was a connection to the past, present, and future. The story of the land, the HOA, and the deployment became a local example of resilience and justice. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers spoke of the determination required to stand up for what was right. It highlighted the importance of vigilance, the value of community support, and the necessity of careful legal preparation. For the landowner, it was a personal victory, but it also had broader significance. As Part 5 concludes, the landowner had not only reclaimed his property, but had restored trust, fairness, and accountability within his community. The HOA had learned the cost of overreach, The community had seen the power of persistence, evidence, and collective support. Standing on the land, looking at the fields stretching into the distance, he felt a profound sense of closure. The fight was over. Justice had been served. And the land would remain a place of memory, peace, and rightful ownership for generations to come.